Emily's hands trembled as she gripped her crumpled note cards, the edges soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times that week. The town hall felt enormous to her, its high ceilings and rows of serious faces making her seem smaller than her 14 years. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really, not in a lineup of polished adults in suits and ties, people who spoke with practiced voices and perfect pauses. Yet here she was, standing behind the heavy wooden podium, her heart thudding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. The murmurs in the crowd quieted as she adjusted the microphone. For a moment, she froze, eyes darting over the audience. She saw teachers, neighbors, shopkeepers, and strangers, people she had passed on sidewalks all her life, now waiting to hear what she would say. Her voice shook as she began, soft at first. Democracy, it isn't just about politics. It's about people, about us. A ripple went through the room, the kind that happens when something unexpected takes place. A young girl speaking of democracy wasn't what anyone had come to hear. Some leaned forward, curious. Others raised their eyebrows. And yet, there was something fragile but fierce in her tone, as though she carried a truth too important to be ignored. Emily's fingers pressed into the cards, but deep down she knew the real message wasn't written there. The silence of the hall pressed in, waiting, and in that pause, she chose courage. A faint laugh came from the back of the hall, sharp enough to pierce Emily's fragile confidence. Her chest tightened, and for a moment, she thought of stopping, of letting her trembling voice fade into silence. She glanced at her note cards again, the neatly written words blurring under the sting of tears she refused to let fall. But then, something inside her shifted. She remembered why she was standing here, why she had asked for the chance to speak. With a slow, steady breath, Emily lowered the cards onto the podium. Her empty hands felt lighter, freer. "I want to tell you a story," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "It's about my grandmother." The room hushed again. Emily spoke of how her grandmother had arrived in America decades earlier with nothing but a suitcase and hope. How she had worked 2 jobs, barely sleeping, to give her family a chance at something better. How she used to tell Emily, in a voice lined with both weariness and faith, that freedom was not about winning or losing, it was about neighbors helping neighbors, about kindness carrying people through hard times. As she spoke, the nervous quiver left her voice. She looked directly at the crowd now, not at her cards. For the first time that night, she wasn't reciting a speech, she was sharing a truth. The chuckles had stopped. People leaned in, listening, not to a child trying to sound wise, but to a young heart speaking plainly about what truly matters. The air in the hall seemed to shift, as though every word Emily spoke carried a weight that pressed gently on the room. The laughter was gone, replaced by a stillness so deep she could hear the soft hum of the overhead lights. In the second row, a man who had been crossing his arms, his jaw set in skepticism, slowly let his shoulders ease. His eyes, once narrowed, began to soften as he listened. Emily continued, her voice steady now, drawing strength from the silence. "Democracy," she said, "isn't just about speeches or elections. It's about what we do for one another when no one is watching." She paused, gathering the courage to share something more personal. "My best friend's family once struggled to afford groceries. They didn't know if they'd have enough for dinner. And you know what happened? People in our neighborhood showed up with bags of food, no questions asked. We weren't divided, we weren't strangers, we were family. That," she added, her hand pressing to her heart, "is democracy too." A murmur of agreement swept through the audience. An older woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A veteran in uniform leaned forward, his face softening into a quiet smile. Even the man in the back who had scoffed earlier tilted his head, no longer smirking, but listening. Emily realized then that the power of her words didn't come from perfection or polish, it came from honesty. For the first time, she felt the crowd not as strangers, but as people connected by something bigger than themselves. When Emily's final words left her lips, there was a moment of silence so complete it seemed the entire hall was holding its breath. Then, like a spark igniting dry kindling, the room erupted. Applause thundered through the space, echoing off the high walls. People rose to their feet, some clapping with hands held high, others wiping tears they hadn't expected to shed. The sound was overwhelming, not polite or obligatory, but raw, born from something deep inside them that her words had touched. Emily's knees felt weak, but her heart soared. She saw faces she had known all her life transformed, the shopkeeper who used to hand her lollipops, now standing and cheering, the teacher who once told her she asked too many questions, clapping with pride, the man in the back who had laughed earlier, now on his feet, his applause the loudest of all. And then came the moment that would stay with her forever. A decorated veteran in the front row, his medals catching the light, slowly stood. With tears shining in his eyes, he raised his hand to his brow in a firm salute, directed not at a flag or an official, but at her. Emily's throat tightened, her vision blurred. She had not expected this. She wasn't just a girl anymore, nervously clutching note cards. In that instant, she had become a voice that reminded people of something they had forgotten. Their shared humanity. And as the cheers washed over her, Emily understood that truth had power, and kindness could move mountains. As the thunder of applause slowly softened, the room seemed to breathe differently, lighter, warmer, filled with something unspoken yet shared. Emily stepped down from the stage, her heart racing, her palms still damp from nerves. She expected to slip quietly back to her seat, but instead she was met with smiles, outstretched hands, and the kind of looks that said thank you without words. Near the aisle, a mother leaned down to her young son and whispered, "This is why we believe." The boy's wide eyes followed Emily as though he had just witnessed a kind of magic. Two neighbors who hadn't spoken in months clasped hands, their old arguments dissolving in the glow of the moment. Strangers embraced, not out of formality but from a sudden recognition that they belonged to one another more than they realized. Emily paused, watching it unfold. The ripple of kindness spreading outward, growing far beyond her small frame. She thought of her grandmother's words, of her friend's family, of the community that had shown her what compassion could build. And she realized that democracy wasn't something distant or abstract. It was alive, here, in the way people listened, cared, and stood together. Her chest swelled with a quiet pride, not for herself alone, but for the truth she had carried into the open. She had spoken with courage, and the world around her had changed, if only a little. As she walked away from the hall, Emily knew one voice, one act of honesty and hope, could light the way for many.